Okay, so thank you all for coming to the Juju Charm workshop. Sorry it took so long to get set up, but we're going to get started. So I'm going to run through, for those of you who know what Juju is, this will be kind of a recap. For those of you who are still kind of new to it, it'll be the fun and interesting journey that you'll take into the world of easy DevOps, I guess. So Juju's whole mentality is that there is an easier and faster way to be able to deploy and manage stuff in a cloud environment. So if you've ever had to manage anything at a service in a remote level, like a WordPress install or a Hadoop cluster or Mediawiki install, MongoDB, Rails applications. If you've ever had to deploy these, you know that oftentimes you deploy it once by typing a lot of commands and doing a lot of searches on a search engine to find out the right way to get it configured. And then you'll do that a couple more times, and then you'll write a really long script to do it for you. Or you'll employ some other tools that allow you to script and then essentially be able to replay that entire installation over and over again. The problem with that is that these scripts are often hard to maintain because they're just kind of what you do off the cuff, whether it's basically your bash history piped to a file or whether you're using something a little more involved like Puppet or another configuration management tool. It's always something that you have to maintain over time. And the problem with these tools is it limits you in your ability to scale out, and it limits your ability to communicate with other services in your cloud environment. So Juju kind of comes in to solve that problem specifically. So you're still recording the steps you take to deploy a service, but you're wrapping a little bit of you're kind of wrapping it in a nice package so that you're able to identify ways that these different services connect to each other. So instead of having to write all these crazy bash scripts and then go in and manually start editing all these files so that they connect together, Juju just takes care of that for you magically. And it does it in just a couple of commands. So in the most cases, all you need to do to start working with Juju is just to bootstrap the environment. And what that does is it creates an instance in your cloud that becomes kind of your cloud manager, your coordinator. It knows everything that's going on in your cloud at any one time, and it knows which services need to talk to each other and the information that they need to talk to back and forth. So that way they're always in sync with each other and they always know who needs to go where, what data needs to go who, and it keeps track of it. It's your orchestration unit. It's kind of the guy who's standing in the front of the podium at a concert, and he's the one directing all the other machines. So it looks something very similar to this. And that's done. Juju is extremely fast in the way it manages things. It does things asynchronously. So I don't have to sit here and wait for Juju Bootstrap to come online. And I don't have to wait for my services to turn online so that I can run successful commands afterwards. I run them, and then Juju takes care of them and executes them when it's ready to be executed. So I don't have to wait for machines to turn on. I don't have to wait for services to come online. And I don't have to wait for relations to talk to each other in order for me to continue about my day. So instead of having to wait for the massive amount of hours for something to compile on a server and be ready to go, I can just run it, set it up, set up all the different things that I need for it to be done, and then I can walk away and come back, and when it's ready, it'll be ready. And everything that needs to be fired off will be fired off when it has to, because this Juju Bootstrap node is orchestrating all the units. So it makes it really efficient for me. I don't have to be babysitting everything. I can just kind of do what I need to do, tell it what I want to achieve, and then go away, and when I come back, I should hopefully have done that. So at any one time, if I want to check on the status of my environment, if I want to say what is going on right now, I can type a quick status message. That'll connect to my environment, and when it's all booted up, it'll tell me, this is what you have right now. So I see I have no services and one machine, and that machine is my Bootstrap, my orchestration node that's doing all this stuff. So I have my Bootstrap node that's sitting and waiting to receive commands. So in the event that I want to deploy something, it's as simple as one command, Juju deploy, let's say, Mediawiki. I'm sure most of the people here are familiar with Mediawiki. It's a huge open source PHP application that runs the likes of Wikipedia and others. So once I've typed deploy, I can do another status, and I can see that I now have two machines. I've got machine 1 and 0. Scroll up a little bit. So I've still got that machine 0 that's a Bootstrap node, and I also have machine 1, which is being provisioned for the Mediawiki service. And
Does services run on 0 at all?
No, that's what the Bootstrap node is. I think there are ways to get around that, but pretty much it sits there for the sole purpose of orchestrating the rest of the environment. So
If you have just one simple service?
yeah, so sorry. Yeah.
Even if you just have even if you just have one simple service, you get 2 nodes.
Well, so the question was, does anything run on the 0 machine, the Bootstrap node? And ideally, in most environments, no. It sits there by itself to run just to serve up and orchestrate all the rest of the nodes. But there are ways that you can get stuff deployed on there. So for instance, if you wish to save down the amount of machines you're running, or if you have one service you want to deploy, there is a way in Juju to deploy just to that one machine. Because it acts as any other machine, it's just also, additionally, it's monitoring the rest of the stuff in your little environment, in your little Bootstrap cloud. In the case of this example here, the service here tells me it's a Mediawiki service, tells me what charm I just deployed from. And I haven't really spoke much about charm, so I'll get to that in a second. And then it shows me the number of units there. So when I typed that Juju deploy Mediawiki, what I told Juju is find me the Mediawiki charm and deploy it onto the server. And a charm is essentially that script that you created, that file that has all your bash history, that Puppet script, that shell script, whatever it is, that is what's encapsulated inside of a charm. So a charm is just a set of instructions. It could be in any language you want. A lot of our charms are in Bash, a lot are in Python, some in Ruby. Some even use Puppet scripts inside the hooks to actually set up the machines. So what's nice about charms is you write it in whatever language you're comfortable with. If you already have a deployment, odds are you've written 90% of your charm. You just kind of mold it to the very loose context of what it encapsulates a charm. It's essentially this set of hooks, and these hooks are these different things that fire off during the life cycle of the service. So there's hooks for what happens when I install a service, what happens when these relations are changed, what happens when a service starts, it stops, configuration is changed. You kind of put the little bits and bobs that connects the pieces, and Juju takes care of the rest. So when I type Juju deploy Mediawiki, it fetches this Mediawiki charm from the charm store, and then it deploys it to my cloud. And so if I type Juju status again, I should have it completely ready to go. While we didn't have to wait, we could have started doing other things inside of the environment. It took me a while to get through all that, so it's good to go. It tells me that the state is started. There were no errors during setup, and if there were, it would have shown me here in the state that there was an error and when it errored out. But in order to run Mediawiki, I need a couple of things. So what I can do is I can pop over to an internet browser. I think this one's good. That was the wrong one. Okay, so I'm going to pop over here, and I'm going to go to jujucharms.com. And this is our charm store. This tells you all the charms that we have available for all the different series and all the different branches inside of it. So I'm interested in the Mediawiki charm. And I can go, I'm using the precise version of it. And so here it tells me descriptions, who wrote it, who's maintaining it, the summaries, the interfaces it provides and requires, and typically it'll show a README. As you see here, there is no README, and that's a problem that we'll fix eventually, or sooner than later, I should hope. But what I can see is that it requires a DB MySQL. So I kind of knew that going to Mediawiki that I require a MySQL database for this. It doesn't come out of the box. So let me pop over to that terminal again, and I'm just going to do this. So now I have a MySQL service that's about to spin up as soon as Amazon gives us an instance and ready to go. Type a status again, I should get the same thing. I see that the Mediawiki is still good to go. It's been started, and this one's pending. Now, I don't have to wait for this, and I don't want to wait for it. I have other things I need to do as an op. So what I can just simply say is Juju add relation, Mediawiki, MySQL. And what that does is it tells Mediawiki, it tells Juju that MySQL and Mediawiki need to talk to each other. I'm going to type that, and it's probably going to give me an error. And so what happens now is Juju says, okay, I'm ready for these two units to talk to each other, but there's a bit of ambiguity. I can't tell which interface you want me to talk on. So MySQL is a database, and Mediawiki needs to talk to the DB instance, so I'm just going to say instead, thank you. Tell it to talk on the DB interface and not the slave interface. So it says the command was added successfully. I'm going to type a status again. So despite the MySQL charm not even being in a state that it's ready to go, I've already created the relation. The relation is being mocked here. It shows me that the relation to DB is set, and it's for Mediawiki, and the same on the Mediawiki charm. It shows me that the relation DB is set to MySQL. So once this unit comes online, Juju, the Bootstrap node, will say, okay, you guys need to talk on this interface. Start exchanging information. And that's kind of where the magic happens. For you, it doesn't really matter what happens. All you know is that it'll work, and in the end, you'll get what you need to do.
So, question.
Yeah.
A lot of the power here. Yeah.
Mike?
Hello? Okay, a lot of the power here is the relations between these two components.
Sure.
Does it still make sense to have Juju charms that deploy single or server components that basically are just standalone? That
So-
don't require databases and relationships with other
Yeah,
components.
so definitely. So for instance, the Steam charm I demoed, the Lightning Talk, that one's self-encapsulated. There's really nothing that it relates to. All it does is it provides, it's a Steam binary, and in this case, little subordinates chunk on top of it, but it doesn't add any external relations. Same with the Minecraft charm. In that case, there's no way to scale up the Minecraft server, and there's no way for it to relate to anything. It's not a web service. It doesn't relate to any other charms in our universe. As a result, it doesn't do anything, but it's a self-sustained service. I can still deploy it and manage it with my Juju Cloud as I would any other service. So having a lack or an excessive amount of relations, either externally or otherwise, doesn't prohibit your ability to build a charm. You can still build a charm, it's just that it won't really plug into anything. And if you try to add a relation to another service, Juju will just say, I don't know what to do, because you haven't defined what interfaces this talks on. So in the event of this, I don't really care what happened, but behind the scenes what's going on right now is when the unit comes online, it's ready to go, and as I can see, it's all good to go here, it's started. What Juju does is it fires off this relation change kind of hook. So what it says is, okay, you guys need to start talking. So MySQL says, okay, I'm going to create a database for you. I'm going to create a username. I'm going to create a password. And I'm going to send all this over a secure wire to this other unit. So Juju says, okay, you need to get this information and talk to him. And Mediawiki says, I'm ready to receive information. When it receives the information, it starts editing configuration files for you and automatically entering all that information in. So the charm author has said, this is how I want to handle the data, and this is what needs to happen when this relation fires, when you add a relation to a database, or when you add a relation to whatever other relations are defined. This is the set of things that needs to happen. So all of that magic happens because the charm authors has taken the time to say, this is what happens when these events occur. So for you as a user, I've typed in 3 commands essentially, and I now have a Mediawiki running. So if I go one more time and check that everything's good to go, I can see that MySQL and Mediawiki are both running. There's no errors on it. They're both related. So what I should be able to do now is copy this URL. Theoretically, what I should be able to do is copy this URL, pop over to a browser, and enter it in. I'm going to go ahead and save time and say that it's actually not going to work. And I'm going to explain briefly why it doesn't work. So by default, all of the charms are closed off to the world. So they can communicate with each other, but there's no public access to them at the moment. And the idea is that you have to explicitly state when I want to expose a service. So that way you don't have your MySQL service automatically exposed on 3306 so the world can talk to it and try to break in. It's all closed off. So what I need to do right now is type the 4th and final command to get this working, and that's the expose command. So I'm going to expose the Mediawiki service in my cloud right now. So one more time, I'm going to type Juju status to see what's going on. And I see now that under the units, it tells me that the open ports and port 80 is open. So the charm authors define what ports need to be open when the expose command is run. So if I were to expose to my SQL database right now, if I wanted it to be publicly accessible, it would likely open 3306. Other charms, for instance, in the Steam charm, when I typed expose, it opened port 27015, and that's the one that the game server talks on. So what's nice about this is when I don't want a service to be publicly available, if I'm still setting it up, or if I need to take it offline for any maintenance, I can simply expose or unexpose it depending on my action intended. So if I pop back over to my browser, and it loaded. So luckily, Chrome is this thing where it does a long time to make sure it's actually offline. I exposed it a little too soon, but in the end now it's exposed, and I have my Mediawiki instance running. So in the 4 or 5 commands that it took me to get this running, I have Mediawiki installed and ready to go. So the power from here is pretty infinite what I can do. I know the Mediawiki charm accepts a bunch of other interfaces. There's slave databasing, so I can set up MySQL slave databases and provide high availability for MySQL. I can add proxy services over this website HTTP interface. I can provide memcache for speeding up MySQL, the Mediawiki instances. So there's lots of other things that I can plug and play into this charm because the charm author is taking the time to put the best practices on how to deploy Mediawiki in the cloud and what services it can relate to. So when I need to, and I need to scale fast, I can just simply either start deploying these additional services, or I can simply scale out the current service. So in this case, I can say, I need more instances of Mediawiki. One is not enough. So I can just simply say, Juju add unit Mediawiki, or Mediawiki. If I run status additional time, I should be presented with a very similar layout that we've seen before. The MySQL, the relation's still there, the units are still up. When I scroll up now, I see I have under units for Mediawiki, I have two, Mediawiki/0 and Mediawiki/1. And in this case, Mediawiki/1 is under the pending agent state. The ports aren't open because it's not done yet. There's no public address. So in a few minutes' time, when Amazon brings up the machine, what Juju's going to do is say, okay, deploy Mediawiki on this unit again. But Juju also knows all of the stuff that's already detailed in the environment. It knows that MySQL exists, that there's a relation between them. So instead of having to do all of that relating again, Juju's simply going to say, okay, new unit, here's the information that MySQL's provided for you. Continue your setup like you normally would. So in the end, I'm going to get almost an exact replica of Mediawiki/0 with the proper configuration, the proper database information, everything that's been related, all the configuration changes I made for it already are all going to be in that unit. So when I add and remove units, it's essentially as I'm scaling out duplicates of the first, but it's doing the entire setup over again for me without me having to make any crazy modifications or shell into any servers. Yes, question?
So when you created Mediawiki, you got a nice default wiki with a default setup.
Mm-hmm.
And you can obviously configure Mediawiki later through the web interface.
Sure.
There's some services that are so easy, you kind of need the configuration when you create them. So is there a way to do this with Juju? Can you
Yes.
pass in a config file or something, or ask the user questions?
So Juju won't prompt you for questions because, again, it's this asynchronous deployment. When you tell it to deploy, it simply sends a signal, I need to deploy this, and then it returns the command line. So there is no synchronous interactiveness with the Juju client. But what you can do is you can define the configuration values on deployment, if that was the case. So this one only has a couple of configuration options, a debug to change the logo to a URL, different admins' names, and a skin by default to use. So it does provide this kind of configuration options. Some charms, depending on how they were set up, are a little more robust in configuration, while some don't require as much configuration. Let me think of a good example of one. HA proxy. So I'm actually going to need this charm very soon because I have two units and they're not really, there's no way to really bounce between them because there's no proxy. So I'll get to that in a moment. But the HA proxy has quite a few pieces of configuration. There's a lot of them, and some of them will probably need to be set initially when I deploy. So if I wanted to change any of the configuration options during deployment, I can do that during the deploy flag, during the deploy command. So if I say Juju deploy, I believe it's config. Yeah. So I can either pass it a YAML configuration file that has all the values that I want in there, or I believe I can do key values. I need to confirm. No? For the file? Okay. Got you. So I can precede it with a configuration file. The configuration files are all in YAML. They look a little something like this.
Just click on details.
Will that take you there? Okay.
Details, yep.
Yes, there we are. So this is what the configuration file looks like that tells Juju all about the different configuration options, the description about them, and then, of course, the default values. I can pass it in a very similar file, except instead of doing the whole key equals is a set of default type description, I just say key value. So if I need to precede it with a file, I can do that by typing that in the configuration flag and passing it a file to use. Likewise, if I want to change the configuration values later on during the life cycle, I can use the Juju set and Juju get command. So if I do Juju get Mediawiki, it'll tell me all the current configuration values and the keys and their values, and if they're still the default or not. So if I wanted to change the logo to look like the Juju logo,
Just set the name.
or set the name, that's even easier actually. I can say Juju set the service I want to set it on, which is Mediawiki, and then I want to set name equals.
New Juju wiki. Yeah, that's good.
All right, so Juju, there we go.
So get only returns values you changed with set. If you went into the web interface for Mediawiki and changed the values, would Juju get know
No,
that you changed?
they wouldn't know about that. So that's
That'd be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool, but that'd be a lot of work to know which files matched up where. So this is the get shows the default values and if they've been changed or not, and then the values I've set through the command line. So if I went in and shelled in and changed the file and then I ran Juju get, it wouldn't show me the value. If I reset it, it would overwrite it. So that's why we really want to try to, if you need a configuration file change, key that you would change frequently, it's preferred to be put into the Juju configuration file rather than having to go in and shell every time to change the file. That way you can manage it in your environment, and when you add units, that configuration change ripples throughout each unit. So, yes. So I'm going to run Juju get Mediawiki to show that the change has taken place.
Show it on the wiki itself.
Right, so the name is now set to the value of Juju. Prior to that, it was set to please set name of wiki. So now when I pop over to the web interface and I refresh,
Last time, right?
that didn't work. Oh, there it is. I cached, sorry. So now in the title page, all the way up there at the top, you can see that it's now set to Juju, where previously it was set to name of wiki. And I could do a bunch of other things that are exposed in the configuration file. And that's kind of lends to the power of Juju. Now all of these nodes running this, if I pop over to the second node, run Juju status one more time, hopefully that second unit is popped up since we did that add unit previously. I'm going to copy this URL instead, and I should get the same exact thing I see with, yeah, there you go. Alrighty. This one's also called Juju, as they're both different URLs, but they all provide the same content because they're all linking to the same database because of the relations we set earlier. And we could add n number of units. If we wanted to, we could say something insane if we needed even more space, Juju add unit 5. And that would spin up 5 additional units to give us 7 total. And as a result, they would all have the same configuration. But they're not doing any load balancing right now. So that's the next part of this idea, is that I've got all these units, but only one's still being hit. So what I can do is deploy a proxy, which in this case, we have HA proxy, as well as a few others, Varnish and Squid as well. For this example, I'm going to use HA proxy. So it's deployed, and again, we don't have to wait. I can just start setting all my relations, and then I can go walk away for a while. So let me go ahead and add a relation to
You can have memcache, right?
we can have Medicache as well, definitely. So I'm going to go ahead and expose HA proxy, and I'm going to unexpose Mediawiki.
So now you're serving balance from the 2 Mediawikis instead of just the one.
Right, so once the unit spins up and Juju finishes doing all the relation changes, in the end result, I should have HA proxy that knows about these 2 units in my Mediawiki service. I should no longer be able to hit each head individually, and I should be able to get a balanced distribution of load between the 2 of them from the HA proxy address. So this will take a couple seconds to spin up, but in the meantime, I need more. So I'm going to also deploy
You can spin whatever you need there.
memcache, D. My whole goal right now is I'm going to poise myself to take over Wikimedia by calling it Juju Media. So I'm going to then add my relation to memcache. And so now I should have a pretty big line of stuff in my status command. Wait for it to come up. So let's start from the top and work our way down while things are starting up. So I can see that I've got quite a few instances now. Looks like 5 in total, or 6 actually. I have a HA proxy charm. It's got 1 unit, and it's already set up to talk to Mediawiki. I've got Mediawiki that's set up to talk to memcache, MySQL, and HA proxy. And I have 2 units, and they're both up and running, and they're no longer exposed. I've got memcache, which is still starting up, that's talking to Mediawiki. And finally, the MySQL service, which is just talking to Mediawiki over the DB, and 1 instance of that. So I'm going to give this a few minutes to get everything set up. And then in the end, what I'll do is hit the HA proxy, and hopefully we should get Mediawiki. Yes, question up there, if you want to run the mic up.
Is there an easy way to deploy memcache on the same machine as HA proxy?
So I don't believe there's a way for us to do that currently. We could, there's a way to do it, but it's not a proper way to do it. I believe in the upcoming releases of Juju, we'll see functionality like that, where we can have two separate services deployed on the same machine. Right now, it's implemented as sort of a, I wouldn't say hack per se, but more of a workaround to get it working. But definitely in future releases, you can see where two services would be isolated, but on the same machine and still sharing a balance. So that's definitely a feature that I know is coming down the roadmap in a bit of time. Yes, another question, sure.
If the services are not exposed, how they are communicating to each other?
Sure. So the question, of course, is if they're not exposed, how do they communicate? The exposing is only for the public, for public view outside of the network. They still have full access to communicate to each other over the network, and they do that communication over TLS. So all the ports between the machines are open, but no ports outside of the cloud instance per se are open. So they kind of have, it's kind of like in a way that the internal firewalls for them are open for the back network, because we're on EC2, there's the forward facing and the back facing. So it uses, if I'm correct, the, what's the permissions called in EC2?
Private IP? It uses the private IP.
The security groups, right. So in this case, all the nodes can talk to each other because they're all within the same chain,
Oh, yeah,
but
the ACLs.
there's no ACL for outside access to these machines on these ports. So when you do a Juju expose, essentially it's connecting to the provider, in this case Amazon, and saying, this security group for this machine exposed this port. And that's how the access is controlled while still being able to transmit data to each other. Yes, definitely. So it looks like Memcache just installed, and it should be up in a moment. I think the rest of them are running. Yes, sure.
How much configuration has been done before this deployment, setting up credentials and selecting EU West for
Yeah.
Amazon?
So before this demo, I edited a file. I can't show you because it has the private keys in it, but it is, I can show you the web page that sets it up. It's essentially 10 entries in a YAML file that set up the provider, the keys for it. And before I walked on stage, that's all I did. I typed Juju Bootstrap, and here we are. So this is more or less a live demo running from scratch. So flying by the seam of the pants in this one. But the getting started guide is pretty in-depth on what you need to do to get started. Documentation.
Configure your environment, right?
Yeah. So these are essentially what's in my YAML. Ooh, a little off there. These are essentially the keys that's in my YAML file right now for EC2. So I just set up tell it's EC2, the control bucket. So Juju uses S3 to, or whatever storage is provided by the provider. In this case, it's S3 to kind of track a couple of key components and also cache the charms you deploy. So every time you deploy or add a unit, it's also the same version of the charm that the other ones exist in the environment. That way you don't get the weird version mismatches. The admin secret, of course, and that's essentially it. The Juju origin tells me to deploy from either the PPA or the distro version of it. So there's a PPA that's a few versions ahead, and then there's, of course, what's in the distro. And finally, SSL hostname verification true is, I believe it's just an option that's for backwards compatibility. But it basically says force all communication from your computer to the cloud to be SSL encrypted. That's the last of the options. So that's all you need to get running with Juju, and of course an Amazon account. In addition to Amazon, we have a local provider which runs LXC, so you don't have to even have a cloud and pay money for it. You can do local development and deploy as you normally would. So the same charms that work on Amazon work on your local machine, as well as HP Cloud, as well as OpenStack Cloud, as well as any other number of clouds that we support. So that's kind of the benefit of writing these charms. It's one set of instructions for all of your, from dev to staging to production and all the way down. Another question, yes?
Repeat the question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear him from here. Okay. So the question is, can you deploy to mixed environments? Essentially, can you deploy across multiple clouds? Currently, no, that's not a feature of the current version of Juju. But again, it is from my time at the roadmap session earlier today, that is on the board. So being able to federate your clouds between multiple providers is definitely on the roadmap for Juju for high availability and other such things. So yes, that's definitely a feature coming.
Also, you might want to mention, in here is where he would set his in here's where you would set the Amazon zone, and that's why he's on EUS and stuff. At the bottom, EC2 provider configuration, I think.
Yeah.
No, on the left, yeah, right there. It shows you all the options that you can set, so.
Yeah, so you can define regions. Right, so we are on EU? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you can set region. I think it defaults to US East, but you can set it to point to any region. I think the same also with the HP Cloud or with OpenStack, you can define what region to deploy to there. So those options are available. And then other options like what instance sizes to deploy on and other constraints you can set during your deployments. So if I wanted a larger MySQL server, if I wanted a larger Memcache server, I could do something like deploy. And I already have a Memcache service running, but I can add an additional one by giving it another name. So I can say, new cache. So it'll deploy the Memcache charm, but it'll call the service new cache, and then I can set a constraint. So I can set default instance, or is it instance type?
No, it's constraint space, instance type. Equals and 1 bar.
Yeah, so I can say whatever the number for the cloud is. I can alternatively just supply what I need. I need 4 gigs of memory. So it'll find the closest instance type that has at least 4 gigs. Or if I need 4 gigs and, I just tapped something on my foot. I think CPU equals 2, so I need 4 gigs with 2 cores, and it'll find whatever it is. It'll find that service, and then it'll find whatever instance type matches that to the best constraints, and then it'll deploy on that. So yeah, cool. Okay. So I don't need to worry about what instance or what AMI or anything like that, because Juju takes care of that with these kind of constraints. So let me just run another status real quickly, see where we are.
And you always get the latest stable AMI of Ubuntu 64-bit server, raw, blank, ready to go. LTS, right.
Unless you define what series you want to run against.
Right, unless
so,
you
yeah.
change it manually. But out of the box, you get something awesome instead of.
So I'm going to scroll up. What I'm really interested in now is my HA proxy charm. I see that it's all deployed, the ports are open, and I have a public address. So if I visit this address. Yes.
On the Memcached instance, it says installed as opposed to started for the agent.
Isn't it all the way through yet? There's a good chance that this may have had an error during installation, or maybe hung during installation, so it's not registered as being dead. It should say started. I can investigate that, and actually I'm going to do that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that HA proxy is running, and then we'll jump into how to debug this. It's actually good this happened. It could just be slow. There's a number of reasons why it says installed. So this is the HA proxy charm, and I get my Mediawiki installed. And I can keep refreshing, and I'll always be served the Mediawiki instance, and this is balanced between 2 nodes. But likewise, if I try to reload any of my other previous pages that I opened, I'll get timeouts, because they're no longer exposed. So now I've essentially pulled my webheads back and only have 1 forward-facing IP address. And if I needed to scale out the HA proxy charm, I believe I can add units, and they'll help distribute the load between them. So now it's time to investigate what is going on with.
Do status again, maybe.
Maybe. No, it still says installed, and to make it a little shorter, you can always just type the service you want. Don't have to worry about the extremely long output. So yeah, unfortunately, it's still showing it's installed. There's a couple of things I can do now. Since charms are so portable and so redeployable, I can just destroy the service and redeploy and hope for better. But if I keep doing this and it's still not going properly, there's a couple of tools I can apply. So one is debug log, which is quite a long command, and it runs more or less an aggregated log between all the environments. But in this case, I want to see that one machine. So instead of tailing all these logs, I'm instead going to SSH into memcache/0. Memcache. It's a good service name. Yes, so now instead of having to worry about what the address is or anything like that, I just type in the unit I want to shell into, and now I'm shelled into Memcached first unit. So there's a couple places I can go. I can start looking through logs. I can check on services. I can see if there's any hooks running. So no hooks are running, so there's a problem with this node. Essentially, it kind of died out. And as happens occasionally on clouds, because clouds are very volatile, stuff happens all the time. Let me go into the I got a charm log. I can go and look at the last 100 lines and hope that this gives me some information. .log. So it looks like I got a bunch of errors. Looks like something happened with the service that it did not properly execute. So what I'm going to do is log out, check it one more time. Still not showing properly. So just going to destroy the service. What this does is it removes the service from the Juju orchestra node, so Juju's bootstrap node no longer knows about it, but the machine remains running. So it does everything it can in its power to retain data for you. So if you accidentally destroy a service, while it's no longer connected to everything, all the data that was on that node is still there. It actually won't disappear. If I do a status again, I'll see that this was attached to machine 5. If I run a Juju status, machine 5 will still show up in my machine list. So if I need to, I can destroy the service, log on, copy whatever data I need to, maintain. I'll scroll back up here, machine 5. This also makes it really easy for me to deploy new services because this machine is now marked as available for provisioning. So if I deploy another service, it's going to reuse that machine, so I can cut down on my instance time for booting up. So if I want to move some stuff around, maybe take away some units. So if I no longer need 3 or 4 units in Mediawiki, I only need 1, I can remove those units, which essentially is the same as a destroy service, but just for that unit. But those machines will stay running. So I can then use them for something else if I need to deploy it. To actually remove the machine, I have to explicitly state that I want to terminate the machine and the machine I want to terminate. In this case, number 5. So doing so, now the machine will be marked as deleted, and then Amazon will eventually get rid of it for me. But I need to get Mediawiki back, my memcache.
So let's say the memcache was up and running.
Sure.
And then something bad happens to the node and it errors out and all that stuff. What happens to my wiki? Is Juju smart enough to say, oh no, this node has disappeared or anything, and it will...
So I'm pretty sure, because I've seen it happen before, I logged into Amazon's console one day, and I still had this environment running, but I wasn't sure which environment it was. So I thought, I'm just going to turn these machines off because I don't need them anymore. So I went in, and one by one, I started clicking delete machine, delete machine, delete machine. I refreshed the page, and about 2 minutes later, those machines were popped back up again. So as long as the Bootstrap node runs, if a machine disappears from the Bootstrap node's topology, then it'll restart it because it knows what machine disappeared. It'll restart it, try to reprovision it, and then reapply the same configuration settings it did before as if it was being added again. So it does its best effort to keep it running. However, if for any reason I destroy the Bootstrap node, my entire machine service will still run, but I'll no longer be able to interact with it. So I know there's a couple of issues like that for high availability that are also being addressed in addition to everything else we talked about previously. So it does its best effort to make sure that the environment you've deployed is what you get and what is running. So I'm going to add memcache to Mediawiki. And so in a few minutes, this will boot up, and then hopefully I'll get a completely started service. And now all my Mediawiki units will be using memcache to share each other's stuff. Where are your emails? Okay. All right. So that essentially is kind of the power of Juju, and I don't have to stop there. I mean, right now I'm running this kind of nice little Mediawiki cluster, but I can start deploying more services that are arbitrary to Mediawiki. I can deploy a blog now. I can deploy Hadoop and start crunching big data, and I can do a number of other things, Node apps, Rail apps, anything I want, all in this environment. They don't have to be explicitly talking to each other. They can coexist without actually having to relate to each other. Yes. Yes.
Now, when everything is deployed in a month, you need to update everything. Does Juju do anything of that?
So the question is how do updates to the service or how do updates to the charms are handled?
Maintaining the environment.
the environment. So when I'll kind of address both then. So when you have a charm running and there's an upgrade for a charm available, nothing happens. You have to explicitly state, I want to upgrade the charm in place. But that may or may not affect the service. It depends on how the charm is created. If you have a service that's running, let's say you're running Mediawiki and several releases come out later, there really is no method for how to keep that maintained unless it's built into the charm. So a few charms have configuration options for auto updates and such that you can run. But that really depends on the charm author and what he believes is the best practice for it. Some charms make you run upgrade charm to get the latest charm, and in addition to that, it'll also update the service. But again, that depends on the charm author and what he believes needs to be implemented. So it's hit or miss, and checking the README file for the charms kind of illuminates what happens with each action runs. And that's kind of what's nice is that they're built by people who do this in real life. And so they kind of put, this is what I do. And what's nice is if you don't quite agree with that, you can fork the charm, make changes to it, and submit them back, and then have your revisions in that charm if they get approved for merging. So yes.
So basically, when I see the new update to WordPress, I run Juju charm update and hope the charm author has something new there.
Well, so in the case of the WordPress charm, when you run upgrade charm, yes, it'll attempt to run an upgrade on the service itself. Likewise, I know that WordPress has quite a robust in-admin panel upgrade, which you can also run. The difference is if you're running multiple nodes, you have to log into each single node to update. So in the case of the WordPress charm, when you type Juju upgrade charm, it will attempt to upgrade the WordPress core and all themes and plugins associated with it. But that's also something that you can disable in the configuration options if it's not something you desire.
And obviously, we want charm authors to include all those options in each charm so that users have the choice to deploy what they want.
Should the set option
Yeah.
for another charm?
Yeah, so let's look at, well, MySQL's good, because MySQL's quite a robust charm. There's quite a lot, and there's a lot of tuning options for it. So,
Yeah, she said we got
Mhm.
save or create.
yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you can do. Hmm?
What would a version change look like if it didn't happen through upgrade charm?
Oh, which one has that? Doesn't, yeah, well, that's one way to think of it. So another charm, we can actually deploy this charm. Let's just deploy this charm. It's a fun charm. Yeah, why would we even bother looking at the help page? Let's just run wild. So PHPMyAdmin, if you're not familiar with it, it's a web interface for managing MySQL. So it's deployed, and I'm going to add relation from PHPMyAdmin to MySQL. And of course, I'll need to expose. So I'm just going to chain these commands together. Nothing is started. I'm pretty confident of it, but I'm done setting up PHPMyAdmin now. It's related, it's deployed, and it's and I'm done. I can leave. So that's kind of the nice feature, but I'm going to wait because I actually want to use it now. So now I'm waiting on the cloud provider and Juju to finish setting up all of these things, but now that it's deployed, I can look at the configuration options for it. So one of the configuration options for PHPMyAdmin is the ability to use the Upstream release. So it's not a specific version per se, but if I wanted to, by default, and most charms will always do the same option, which is if it's possible, deploy from the distro, otherwise a very sane, stable source. But the Upstream is typically a couple releases ahead of what's in the archives, just because the security team does a fantastic job making sure it's really safe, but I like bleeding edge. So what I could just say is Juju set, for PHPMyAdmin, use Upstream.
Show the page first so we can see the.
Yeah, well, it's not deployed yet, but I can do something like this. And, well, true. And what'll happen is it'll do a bunch of magic, and in the end, I'll have Upstream. So when this is done booting, I'll go ahead and just switch back and forth. And as you switch, all your data is maintained, but you get different versions of the application. Other configuration options you find, for instance, in MySQL. MySQL has some really cool tuning stuff in it. So right now it's set to very safe defaults. So it takes whatever in the archive, and then it applies the best configuration for the safest running of MySQL in the instance you choose. So this is kind of hard to read, so I'm going to go over to the web interface because it should be a little easier to consume. So MySQL. I'm going to pop over to the configuration. So what I have is, like I said, how much data that I want in memory for the DB, and by default set to 80% of whatever the RAM is available, but I can tune that to however I like, whether specifying an actual amount or specifying a percentage. My preferred storage engine defaults to InnoDB, but if I want to, I can use my ISAM or another custom module. And then the tuning level. So right now it's set to safest. There are 3 values: safest, fast, and unsafe. And the author goes into detail about what each does. So when I set the safest, all the settings are tuned to have maximum safety at the cost of performance. Likewise, fast is tuned, turns off most of those safety controls, but data may be lost, but you also get a boost in performance. And unsafe goes crazy. It tries to run as fast as possible, and it has no real regard to your data. So with these different settings, you can kind of, what do you like? What do you want to use? And likewise, it has a flavor. So right now it uses the distro flavor by default, but you can also use the Percona flavor. And there are a bunch of other things that you can do in these charms depending on what the charm author has added for you. And as a charm author, you can also add whatever configuration options make most sense for you. So some of them allow you to choose where the source comes from, whether it's a PPA, whether it's a branch in Bazaar, or whether it's Git, or whether it's distro. And there's a bunch of different options depending on what the charm's intended to do. So let's go back to the command line, run another status.
So if there's a service that you're a
Perfect.
particular expert are and want to help us install these hooks and whatnot, and have all these options for things like that, we could definitely use your help to add things that
So-
are useful to you.
I wanted to deploy the phpMyAdmin charm, and the install failed. So I'm very angry at that charm author right now. I'm going to SSH into phpMyAdmin and find out why it installed. And if it's real quick, I can fix it. If not, you'll have to take my word for it that it does work, just like this works. Let's see.
Hash some mishmash.
Oh, maybe the package name changed. So I see that this error, and I know it needs an extra package, so I'm gonna try to install it real quickly. Which is, I don't use the PPA anymore. It's charm helper sh, yeah. Oh, there it is. So the package name has changed in this, and so now I know that this is how I fix it. I can go fix it in the charm and submit it to be merged. But I've already fixed it on the node. I'm good to go. I've added the package that I was missing. So what I can do is, for this one instance, I can just say Juju resolved, because I fixed the error. I want to retry the installation, make sure it has everything it needs. And then I can just say for phpMyAdmin/0. And so Juju's now going to retry the installation for it. And I can check Juju status. So while Juju really streamlines your deployments, it's still powerful enough that when you need to be an admin and when you need to find out what's wrong and when you need to fix the tools, it gives you the tools, it provides you the tools to actually take care of it. So there's another install error. I don't know if that's the old one or not. Give it a couple more seconds. But in this case now I can go open a bug against the charm, and the charm author should be super responsive in getting it fixed. Yeah. But in this case, you can switch between Upstream and distro, and other charms allow you to lock into versions. I think the Drupal charm lets you do that, so you can define what version of Drupal you want to run, etc. Cool. All right. So because I'm such good friends with the charm author, I know there's additional steps I need to take before it actually works. So if I go to it right now, it's actually not going to work. Oh, that's the wrong one. Excuse me. For reference, if you haven't noticed, I actually wrote this charm as well. So all of this gold is actually going towards me and not some poor other soul. So this is what I get. This is actually an older charm that needs to be updated. Yes. So I can't actually log in because I don't actually have a user because I didn't set it. So let me read the README. README documents. And so when I see down here, I could see that I need to set the password for it. So it won't give you a default password because otherwise, if you deploy a stock PHP admin charm, anyone really has root access to your database now. So instead, it requires you to set the password. I'm going to pop over here. I'm going to set the password to something secure. Actually, that's not going to work. So I've set the command now, and I can hopefully hop back over to here. Default user is Juju admin, and I can be changed, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to roll over here and refresh. Juju admin. Ta-da! So PHP admin, yay! And the important part is, like I see, I got the Mediawiki, and if I started adding more services to my SQL, those databases would pop up as well. I could administer the Mediawiki if I needed something custom, maybe outside of the typical workflow. But the important part is over here, I'm using 3.4.10.1 Deb 1. So let's do this. So now the hooks are essentially saying, okay, the configuration file has changed. This is the new value, and then it runs a set of instructions based on that I've written in bash. So in this case, it says, okay, uninstall the package, but remember the information that we use for configuring it. Download the latest stable, do some nice cryptographic verification of our payload in case a mirror gets compromised from SourceForge, and then install the package, or in this case, the tarball, and then reconfigure it. And in a couple of minutes, let's check to make sure there's no errors.
Is that compiling from source?
Well, it's a PHP application, so it's about as compiled as you can get it in PHP. It's more or less just untarring and moving it around.
But it's up to the charm author if you want to have flags for, you know, the charm really is however you can get it installed on there. You just add it as a hook. So ideally, we want all charms to have an option for grab from the archive, grab from a PPA, in some cases grab from source, or pull right from Git and build it on the spot if you want. We don't.
Yeah,
we
so
don't really
if
care.
you need to run like a custom version of Nginx with these custom compiled modules, you would just compile it in the hook like you normally would. It would take several minutes. And there's charms that can take up to 30 minutes to run depending on what they're doing. But that's the result of getting it the way you want it and not having to babysit that compilation. So let's go back over here. And I'm pretty sure if I refresh, I'm running 3.5.3 and it's up to date. So I've just switched, the database is still there, and of course I can do this all day. I can switch upstream to false.
Watching that never gets old.
So it's just gonna go back and forth all day. And I mean, this is just one of the powers of the hooks is you can do a lot of things with just changing a little bit of configuration and not having to do it all by hand over and over again. So yeah. Question, yes.
Yeah, so you just found a bug in this charm. How do you know where to go to file
Sure.
a bug in that
That's
charm?
a great question, actually. We should file a bug against this because it's broken. If you go to the Juju charms page, you can find the charm that it affects. In this case, it's the precise PHP admin charm. And underneath here, it says links. There's a repository and there's a bugs link. Charms has their own huge project in their own distro, I think, in Ubuntu. So each, in Launchpad. So each of the charms is its own project. So as a result, I can simply report a bug against this charm. What is it? Charm. I can get more information. Hopefully a lot more information than that. I can apply, it's the same as you would do in any Launchpad bug. I know it's confirmed. And I will definitely fix this bug. And I report the bug, and then the charm author. Oh, it's yours now. So the lovely Juan will fix it for the charm author. But you know, as the so the charm author will get the email that there's a bug against it. You can see all bugs reported against that specific version of PHPMadmin. So each charm is maintained in its own series. So deploying the Oneric version of PHPMadmin may not be the same as Precise, as it may vary depending on what's in the distro. In this case, that's probably what happened. This charm was written in Oneric, and it was kind of moved forward without really fully vetting it out. Now that we have a different process for that, that won't happen in the future. But I can see that there's just one bug reported against it. Once it gets fixed, it'll be merged, and you can run Juju charm upgrade, and you won't have to worry about it again.
What you will see in the future is the Jenkins status of the charm for multiple providers on the page. So you'll know before you deploy green on Amazon, green on HP Cloud, green on Rackspace. And then we'll be able to track that so that things like this don't happen.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an overview of Juju and deploying and stuff like that. We can keep deploying stuff. We can talk more about charms if you guys are interested. Questions, please feel free to ask them.
Where would you recommend we start for writing a charm? Is there a Hello
Yeah.
World charm or something?
So we have a work item this cycle to fix documentation because the Hello World charm actually doesn't deploy properly. But if you wanted to learn more about the structure of it, you can look in the documentation. But what I recommend people is you find something you're passionate about, find something you're already deploying or you have expertise with or you're familiar with, because it'll make it easier for you to know what's going on. And then find charms in the charm store that you're familiar with. So if you're intimately familiar with WordPress, you deploy it on a regular basis, reading the WordPress charm and the hooks, they're all, they are pretty much just flat files. So it's very easy to go through and consume what's happening line by line. So if I want to see what happens in the install hook, this is what happens. It's the bash file that does several things of installing packages and then moving some files around. So if you know what WordPress is, you can go through each of the hooks and kind of find out what happens during each step of the life cycle. What happens when a database is added? How does it handle the configuration? How does it get the information? But really there's a nice, albeit broken, but nice high overview of, how to create a charm from scratch in the Juju website.
And where would we go to get help writing charms? Or an IRC channel or something?
I'm sorry?
Is there an IRC channel to
Yes.
ask questions?
So all the Juju guys kind of hang out in Hash Juju on Freenode. They're extremely helpful people. So they're more than welcome to help you walk through charms. If you don't have any idea what you want to start with, you want a project, they kind of know what's hot, what people are looking for. So if you need help picking something out, they'll be more than happy to point you in the direction to get started somewhere.
I'm always looking for people to help write charms, so if there's something you care about that you want help with, let me know.
So yeah, so the writing a charm example here goes through, how do you create the metadata for it? How do you define interfaces? How do you write hooks? And some basic strategies and common pitfalls to avoid when you're writing a charm. So that's definitely, I would recommend for a great place to start first. And then just digging into charms, if that's the best way you understand is what's been previously done, look there. Yes, any other questions? Anything else you guys want to see?
We have another hour of the charm, right?
Do we? Yeah,
Yeah.
the session was canceled?
No, it just moves and I'll go and.
Okay, cool. All right.
Take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, we can do a 5-minute break if you guys want to stretch your legs out. Yeah, go ahead. We'll break and I'll see if I can get the UI working. How do you get the, show me the UI. I want to make sure, because that'd be cool.
I have to go to a session, I think. I have to.
So this is already bootstrapped. So I'm not sure if any of you have seen the announcement, but recently Mark Shuttleworth at the last the ODS keynote speak mentioned that Juju now has a UI. It's really slick. It looks really awesome, and it allows you to do most of the stuff from the command line inside a web UI by just dragging and dropping things. So this is a shared session that gets wiped every 10 minutes or so, but as you can see, more and more stuff gets added as people type in for deployment. So I can just deploy a charm by saying, WordPress already deployed. Let's do something else. So when I do deployments now, yep, similar to your question before about, I think he's not here anymore. But the question about pre-configuring before your deployment is taken care of in the UI now. Right before you deploy, it gives you the list of configuration options. So you're allowed to now, you can go change things. So I want to set a password before I deploy. I can say, hey, now I have passwords. When you confirm the service is deployed and added to the stage, there we go. And now I can continue on my way for adding relations and stuff. So if this demo works, we can actually do it live without people jumping in and interrupting. All right, let's see if this worked. Yeah, so it looks like that's not happening. That's unfortunate. So we'll use the public one for now for demonstration. So I'll go briefly into kind of the cool stuff you could do with the UI, kind of the cool features they built into it. So it's all static HTML. It's not doing anything crazy. And then it's using WebSockets to communicate with your cluster. So in this case, I've deployed this PHPMyAdmin charm, and I can add relations to it by clicking here, build relation, and then it shows which services can actually be related to it. So it takes away all the guesswork of, what interfaces, what relations. As you remember, the first time we tried to add a relation, it gave us an ambiguous error. That goes away because now it presents you with all the options when you add relations. So it's a really slick tool for people who like UIs. It gives you a good overview of what your environment looks like. What are you running? Where are the relations? Where are the errors? So instead of parsing through this giant JSON file, or YAML file, I think is the status, the YAML syntax, you could just look at this UI. And they both work together. So if you were, when you successfully deploy this and once it's out and ready for use, as you deploy stuff from the command line, it'll just show up in your interface and vice versa. So they're completely synchronized with each other in that respect. Similarly, you can do things like adding units. So I can add 3 more units of this, and that just goes, or not. There we go. So now they're firing up. I can just look and dive into the relations that are there. The settings, I can change the settings so I don't have to use the command line and kind of read through all these different files. Everything's there that you would want to actually use to manage your environment. It's all right there. Likewise, I can look at the charm information, and finally, the constraints. So in this case, the default constraints are AMD 64, 1 CPU, and that's it. I'm not sure what these extra options are. I think they're still kind of designing the interface. So this is a rough cut, but even for a rough cut, they've done a fantastic job to kind of show the power of what the UI can bring to the entire deployment operation. So here I can see the PHPMyAdmin's coming up. There are plenty of errors. That's the test box. But I can do other things like delete stuff. Well, let's destroy this. And it's gone, and all my other units that were floating around are no longer there, but I can also redeploy it. And I'm going to redeploy to show you how it handles that ambiguous relation stuff. So let's go with Mediawiki. I'm going to deploy this, and I'm going to call it and I'm also going to say, so like I said, all of these configuration options that we set before, one at a time, except we're doing it now right during the deploy line, which you can do in the command line. You simply have to pass it an already formatted YAML file for the key value pairs. So now it's deployed. Even though it's not fully up and running yet, I can start adding relations just like in the command line. So if I'm going to go ahead and just say MySQL relation needs to exist, and it shows me which one do you want. So when it's an easy match, it just simply does it, but in the case of an ambiguous relation, it gives you the option to choose. I want to set up not a slave, but the regular. And I can go ahead and also long click and put it over here, memcache, and then I can build a relation to HA proxy. And so I can do everything I would, but I'm orchestrating all of my stuff in Juju through the UI. So it's a really fantastic tool that should bring a lot of exposure to Juju and make it even simpler for people to manage their stuff in their environments. So for the next half of this talk, we can go a number of ways. So I'm interested in what you guys are interested in next. We can do more deployments. We can go through the variety of charms. There's over 100 charms right now that you can deploy. Oop, there we go. So we can go through, find people's favorites and kind of see how they work in the web. We can dive deeper into what the structure of a charm looks like. We could do a number of things, or just field questions you guys may have so far. So shout them out. What do you guys want to see? Yes, I think so.
Where's the microphone?
I don't know. Oh, here it is. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we mentioned the first half. What about services on the same unit, or is that the future? Or
So there's a way to do it, and it's a bit of a hack and a workaround. Let me see if I remember how to do it. But yeah, it's not as easy as
To do which one?
deploy. Let's say let's say deploy something to the Bootstrap node or something like that. I think it's placement is local or something.
What about Jitsu?
Yeah. So that's actually a good idea. So there's these kind of features. So Juju is in the middle of a rewrite to the Golang. So it's in Python currently, and they're rewriting it. So while the Go version's catching up with feature parity, in order to keep adding extra features to the Python Juju without actually having to set the mile marker further and further back for the Go team, this idea of Jitsu became an example of what could be in the future versions of Juju, what other options could be added. And it's kind of become a playground for, essentially Jitsu. It's this kung fu extra Juju stuff that you can use. So one of the options is the ability to monitor your environment using Gorse and stuff like that. And then can you actually do multiple placements in Jitsu? Yep.
Jitsu deploy to.
Oh, that's where that came from. So there you can deploy different nodes. You can, let's see where we are right now. We have an environment. You could also open additional ports. So if the charm author hasn't properly opened the port, you can specify to open specific ones for the time being. You can,
Jitsu space tab.
hey, you know what? That's a good idea.
Or not.
There we go. So these are the additional things you can add kind of on top of Juju that don't normally come in the Juju client. The deploy to, you can export an environment. So that's very helpful if you're saying you have a perfect layout of what you want on your local machine or on another cloud, and you want to move it into, say, from HP Cloud to Amazon, or from your local machine to the Amazon cloud. You can Juju export and pipe that to Juju import and specify the environments you want to export and import to, and as a result, it'll take the entire topology from top to bottom, what services, what relations, all of that, and it'll push it up into another cloud. The only thing it won't copy is your data. So if you're running a Mediawiki install with MySQL, it doesn't know how to handle the MySQL databases, but you can at least get the entire environment exported without having to
So
write
it's a shallow copy.
each of the things. Hmm?
It's a shallow copy.
Yes, shallow copy of the environments. You can do Juju Watch as well. We've been sitting here typing Juju status every time, but Juju Watch is essentially Juju status. Oh yeah, thank you. It's essentially watch wrapped around Juju status. Why didn't that work?
So, no, it's a Jitsu watch, service name, unit name.
I don't have any services deployed, so that's
Dash
not gonna work.
H. I'll show you. Give you a
Yes.
couple of examples.
So you could set a specific watch for, I want to see when MySQL and WordPress are related and this happens. So you can set conditions for watches, and so you can have that happen and then beep when you're done. So you could be off doing something else and be notified when it comes back up. So it adds those kind of extra commands that people would want without actually having to worry about putting them into core and stuff. And then it's also a good place for us to test, would this be a good idea? Does it have a use case? And so a lot of those you'll find in there. So deploy to for co-location is part of Jitsu, and the other one. So that is available on the side. It's like an extra bolt-on project you need. So let's get an environment run up.
yeah, well, I was thinking about this. This is a great benefit for when you run large sites and so on. but if you just want WordPress and MySQL for that, and just one Amazon server, is still Juju the place to go?
So you can use Jitsu for that. So I'm going to deploy WordPress and MySQL on the same server with Jitsu. So I just deployed WordPress, and I'm going to, do I need to wait for the WordPress node to come up for deploy to? No? Okay. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to wait a second for the WordPress node to be provisioned, and then I'll just deploy MySQL to that. And I can still add the relations like normally. Juju will still handle all of that communication, but they'll be on the same node together. So because of Jitsu, the project, it became obvious that this is a really important use case for people. And so because of that, it will become a feature in the Go version. So when that's released, you will have this co-location idea. And several other options that are in Jitsu now will be ported into Go because of that the feature is such a popular one, or it has a valid use case for it that maybe didn't exist previously. Was it watch?
Jitsu watch server unit name, WordPress/0 -- state equals started. So that'll block until. Sometimes when you're trying to deploy a complex environment, you have to deploy something and wait for that to be up in order for you to deploy something else. So that's where the Jitsu watch came about. So we use Jitsu as a sandbox, where we play with new ideas, things that are not in Juju core, and it's highly experimental. All the crazy stuff we do there, and then as it becomes more popular, then we use that as a well-established argument that we should probably start getting those into Juju core. So we play with all the features here, then we advocate for those to become part of the Juju core.
So let's take a look at what other things are there while this is spinning up.
Run as hook.
Yeah, run a hook is a good one. I was just trying to think of a way to best describe it. So
when you're creating a charm, you iterate. I mean, a lot of the times I run it and run it and run it again, right? And there's no simple way for me to rerun a relation or a particular hook and get all the information that I need. So Jitsu run as hook allows me to run pretty much anything that I want as a hook. Normally you would run your particular hooks, but it gives me the option. I want you to run config change. I want you to run this particular relation, and it allows you to have better control on what script to run in which unit, and it's good for debugging.
Right, so then essentially, like for instance, what we could have done is instead of waiting for my install hook on PHPMyAdmin to fail, I could have made the changes and then kept running run as hook and then watching the files and making changes to the charm live. And then once I'm done with that, I can take those changes, put them back in the charm, and commit them. And that way I don't have to deploy, wait for the error, find the fix, destroy, redeploy, find another error later on, fix, destroy, etc. So the run as hook allows you to continuously run different hooks, as opposed to signing in and running the hook on the machine through SSH won't quite work because Juju runs in a kind of a special environment with expected environment variables. So the run as hook is a shortcut for you to do that without having to actually continually trigger the hooks through an external method like adding relations and removing them or trying to reinstall over and over again. So I think, nope, not yet. Just to double check.
Nope,
Okay, so it's just about done, yeah. Well, you can see that the agent's running, so Juju's been installed on it, but the charm is still pending, so it's almost there. That's kind of my way to know, like, we're so close to the finish line. If I see this is still pending, I get kind of concerned, because it's like, well, what's my state? So are most people here familiar with WordPress? Have you used WordPress before? You've deployed it, you've managed it? The WordPress charm is kind of unique. I'm not sure if anyone was here yesterday for the demo one game. It was pretty cool, but The WordPress charm is unique because it does a lot of stuff outside charm. So one of the, okay, cool, it's deployed. So I'll get to the WordPress charm in a second. Let's just do a jitsu deploy to thank you, Kapil. I love your help message. I'm pretty sure it's deploy to, so I'm going to say MySQL. Give it a unit, right? Or do you give it
I
a
usually give it a machine number.
number?
But no,
Okay.
but try it that way.
sure?
Oh, look, you got the help you were looking for.
Yes, this is the help I needed.
Oh, you got it backwards.
Oh man, that was close. And it's a machine. Okay, so I know that it's machine 1 because there's only one machine, but I could always check in the Juju status. Let's go up a little bit, actually. Oh. Oh, it's on the second page, actually. Oops. Excuse me. So I can see here that it's assigned to machine 1. So that's where that unit's on. So let's go over to here. Deploy to 1,
Another charm.
MySQL. Okay, so if I do a Juju status again, I should see that both MySQL and WordPress units are assigned to machine 1, as they are. So when the MySQL charm comes up, it'll be installed side by side with that charm. There's always a danger of the conflict. There may be conflicts, but that's just something else to be prepared when you're doing something like this. In the Go version, they're addressing how to handle that with keeping them separated while on the same machine. But in the meantime, you have this option if it's something you desire for cutting down machines, or if you're testing things, you want to keep a stack on a simple machine, things like that, you have that available to you.
The conflicts become pretty obvious when you try to deploy two services that open port 80 or port 443, then you have issues.
So if I want to write a charm now, should I take in mind this use case, or should you in the future take care of this in the background?
So Juju, when co-location lands, there will be no need for modifications to charms. Juju, they will find a way to modify so that the existing charm library will work fine with it. And in the event that it does it, they'll make sure they announce, and they'll handle a way so that charms will be able to deprecate cleanly if they're not able to do so. So you'll have that ability, and they'll make sure that it works backwards with the current charm library because we have so many now. Making a huge update would be quite tedious. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the relation stuff as well. But what's unique about the WordPress charm, unlike the Mediawiki charm, where when you add units, you need to put a proxy in front of it. So you need like HA proxy, varnish, squid, something like that. The WordPress charm was designed so that you can scale out without needing a proxy in front of it. So it does self-load balancing between units, and that's one way that we help to cut down on the number of services you need deployed. So ideally, I'd want my database server and my web heads should know how to talk to each other. So what we did is we created this idea of a peer relation. So whenever we add units, Juju automatically tells all of the other units, the peers in that service, about each other. And from there, they all create, using Nginx, they create a reverse proxy upstream. So any one of the web heads you hit will just automatically proxy to any of the other ones. You'll never know really which one you're hitting per se. So if we can see that modeled in this status, cool, they all came up okay. So here we see that there's two relations for WordPress. There's the DB MySQL, which we've already defined. There's also a load balancer to WordPress. So WordPress is related to itself, so every unit we add is then self-balanced. So if I go, oh yeah, we're gonna blow this one up. So I'm running a site like OMG Ubuntu or another blog, and I've got traffic. And WordPress is a great blogging platform, but it still, in some area, lacks the ability to scale very well. It's very hard to get caches coordinated, to get plugins and data all coordinated across pages. It's quite a nightmare when you need more than one machine. And I've asked WordPress experts, how do you handle this? And they say, well, you just get bigger machines. And then you start caching on that machine. And so I think, well, let's do scale out. So let's add 6 of the WordPress services. That'll give us 6 more instances, and we'll have 7 total for WordPress. And the result is they'll all talk to each other. So let me go ahead and also expose WordPress. And there's an additional setup step for WordPress where you just enter in your blog data. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that right now.
And while you're at it, who wrote WordPress?
Hmm?
Who wrote it?
I wrote the charm for it. So, oh yeah, so. But Automatic and Mark Mullenweg and them maintain the WordPress platform. This is another charm that also tries to keep it as up-to-date as possible. There is a WordPress package in the archive. Unfortunately, because of the expedited pace of which that WordPress releases stuff, it's very far behind, and it's not easy to roll with the environment. So unlike the other charms where it always defaults to distro, this one has no option but to use what's from Upstream. So most cases, that's not typically allowed. It's you default to what's in distro with the option to upgrade. Unfortunately, some charms you can't do that just because of the pace at which they're developed. So things like certain Ruby applications, well, not anymore, I guess Ruby's kind of fixed now, but if there was a problem where you couldn't actually run your application because there was no existing install or the install was too old, then using Upstream is okay in that case. So there are some exceptions to these rules. So say Juju blog. I'm just going to give it a very secure password.
Very secure.
So thank you. WordPress is now set up. We could have added that as a way to do it during configuration, but WordPress already handled that part for us, so we can just define what step we're in. So it made it very easy just to use the web UIs. So I'm going to log in as admin and my super secure password.
And when you created the username and password, that propagated to all the other?
Right. So what happens was the installation actually doesn't take place until you finish that information. So the database structure doesn't get created yet until you finish that kind of setup. The database was created by MySQL, but the data wasn't populated. It wasn't seeded until you finish that page. So we just kind of made it so that when you type that page, it's seeded and then it installs and you get this. But all those changes will be out on each node. So while it's hard for me to hit one node in specific, by actually going to any of the nodes, I'll be randomly hitting any other nodes. So we can test that this actually works across all of them if they've come up. So it looks like they're still starting up. A couple of them have started so far, but they're still setting up. But if I go to any one of these addresses, I ideally would hit any one of the other peers, but I'd also get the WordPress install. But we thought, well, let's go one step further. So we found that we could use Nginx and Memcache to have Nginx serve static content straight out of Memcache. But there's no way to attach Memcache to WordPress without using a plugin. So right now, I have kind of default plugins, the Akismet, the spam protection one, and as well as the Hello Dolly default one. But what I can do is I can add a Memcache relation to it because Juju says that it can accept that kind of a relation. Let's go to WordPress. So it says that it can also, it takes in these three different, it can consume these three different relations, an NFS mount, a caching mount for Memcache, as well as a DB MySQL interface. So I can attach any one of those units that have that interface that's exposed. So what I can do is if I want to find out what I can actually play with, I can click on the mount interface and I can see that there are charms that provide that, Gluster, MFS, NFS, wraps, and there are charms that consume that interface. So any one of these charms in this list can be added to any of these charms in this list. So I can start seeing, well, how can I help expand my interface? How can I help do this? So in the event of NFS, what I can do is I can add an NFS mount so that when I'm in the admin panel on multiple nodes and I click install, install a new plugin, that plugin update will automatically propagate to all the nodes through NFS mount. That way I can still be, you know, the lazy WordPress admin that wants to keep everything in the control panel without actually source controlling it, but without having different nodes out of sync. So that's one way that that problem was solved. The WordPress charm actually allows you to point it to a repository. So if I did actually put my WP content folder, which has my plugins and themes, in source control, I can tell the charm what branch to pull from. So if I go to details here, I see that the WP content option takes a path to a source control repository. In this case, it can be Subversion, Git, Bazaar, or Mercurial. Any kind of URL will work and suffice. So I have it pointed by default to this, which is just the standard plugins and themes that you saw. But in the event that I wanted to demo this, I could change it. And I think I have a WordPress sample. Oh, I think it's in my personal branch, actually. WordPress demo. So the contents of the repo is basically a WP content folder. And in there, I have plugins and I have themes. And I have the Jetpack plugin. And I have a patchwork theme. So inside of this here, I go to Appearance, Themes. The other nodes must be coming online. Excellent, they're actually all online. And so they're all bouncing to each other. So when you do that, the token which you encrypt your cookie against gets changed so they all share the same one. So if I log in again, I should not have a problem.
What do you like to do with that DNS router?
It's really up to what you're comfortable with. You can stick them all in like ELB, or you can round robin DNS. You can just have it hit one webhead and it still disperses the traffic as you see fit. So as long as that webhead still exists. Am I typing the wrong password in? Oh my, I forgot what password I used. Nope, that's right. Demos. I shouldn't be. It should, here's the blog. So the blog works. That's good. WP admin. I wonder if it just has an old cookie that's no longer valid. This was actually a problem that we had previously where for some reason or another, so WordPress uses just cookies for authentication. So there's no session data. So that was lucky for us, but all the cookies are encrypted against common passphrase. So when you create each different node, a new random passphrase was created. So to fix that, the passphrase is shared across all of the nodes. For whatever reason, I can't log in. So, but my traffic's being bounced across all these different nodes, so at least that worked. But now I can no longer update my content, which is a bit of a problem. So I'm going to wait for that page to refresh and then try one more time. And if that doesn't work, I'm just going to create a new deployment, and we'll go from there. Yes, so that's not working. Well, that's a shame. This typically does work very well. So, like before, I can go open a bug now. I don't know what the problem is, but I know that there is a problem. Yes?
Could you disable the host without destroying or uninstalling?
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
Could you disable some of the WordPress units without uninstalling them, or?
No,
one have that level of-
unfortunately, the only way to break that relation is to actually remove the unit. So you can, so if we have too many units floating around, we could just say, a Juju remove unit WordPress 6. I no longer need the 6th WordPress unit. The machine will still exist though. As before, it doesn't actually delete the machines, it preserves them. So if I needed to add unit again, it would just simply reuse that machine. And since all the files were already there, it wouldn't be a problem. It would just simply pick up where it left off, more or less. It would still run through the configuration changes and all the hooks, But again, it still provisions a lot faster than if I didn't. Oops. Okay, so wrapping up, this typically works very well. But if I were to change the source of the content, I would see all the new plugins in there. And by creating these interfaces, we can make the charm super expandable. We can add more relations. We can scale it out and scale it down. And we don't actually have to do a lot of work behind it. So when we add memcache simply caches the pages to memcache, but then Nginx serves the content straight from memcache. So we no longer are using PHP at all. And that helps cut down on resources. And we don't need to scale out anymore. We have a virtually stateless distribution content of data. Adding NFS, when we do scale out, I don't have to keep things in version control. I can just simply do it in one admin panel and it syncs across all. So the flexibilities of charms are virtually endless. Whatever you think needs to actually happen for your charm, you simply just make it do it by adding relations, putting in the configuration change hooks, et cetera. And in the end, you become a powerhouse charm that can do all sorts of things with a couple commands. Yep.
And we're out of time.
That's it.
Thank you very much.